Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
And your co-host Rich Gear here as well. And Doug got an exciting guest. I'm very interested to hear our presentation this morning about the hydroplate theory because I read it's from Dr. Brown's book, right? Is that correct?
That's right, yes.
Yeah, and I read that years ago, and it was very persuasive. And I haven't heard much from him since then. So this will be I'm quite excited to hear this.
Well, Kevin, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you are involved in the hydroplate theory, and did you know Walter Brown personally?
Yeah, I knew Walt Brown, Dr. Walt Brown, personally spent at least 100 hours on the phone with him over the years. He was very instrumental in increasing the faith that I had in the Word of God. I was a total pagan, didn't know anything about the Word. But then when I got saved, I read about the flood and I knew it was true because it was the Word of God. But I just, from my inquisitive scientific kind of mind, I was going to nuclear power school at the time for the Navy. I thought, how did it happen? How could the highest place on the mountain be flooded to 22 and a half feet? And long story short, a submarine sailor friend of mine, Christian, I was telling him just before my wife and I got married, we just had our 50th anniversary. I said, Kent, if you ever find an answer for where did the water come from, where did it go, you let me know, which he did by handing me the fifth edition of Dr. Brown's book, which is now the ninth edition. And when I read that book, just like Rich just said, extremely compelling. It was the only thing, one, I knew it was biblical because by then I had read the Bible front to back, and there was a lot of allusions to the flood other than just Genesis. And it answered the question. And it went along with physics. It went along with the things I'd been trained in the Navy, as far as you don't move things without forces to move things. You have to have, you have to overcome friction. You have to this and this. And so then one of my sons went to Washington State University and got a little bit crossways with the evolutionary teachers. And, well, Dad, what about the frozen mammoths? And and I started thinking, I go, man, Dr. Brown's fifth edition didn't have the mammoth chapter. And I thought, well, the fountains of the great deep burst up and the water from underneath the crust went up like the Bible says, and especially in Peter. And if it went high up into the atmosphere, it'd come down and it would bury the mammoths frozen standing up. And I thought, I got to tell Walt. So I called up Walt and I said, Walt, my son's getting messed up in school, and I think your theory would answer the hydroplate. Would answer where did the frozen mammoths come from? And he goes, well, it's in my book. I agree with you. It's in my book. I'm like, well, I read your book. It's not there. And he goes, well, what edition? I added it in the sixth edition. And
Oh,
and then from there on, I was so sold. And then he and I developed a relationship where he trusted me to, he knew I had read his theory, and he'll talk to anybody that's read it and has questions. And I wanted to ask him questions at times as I'm reading and I didn't understand. And then he started bouncing his changes off of me because he felt like if I could understand it, then people could. And so we spent lots of hours. Saw him in person, stayed at his house once, and we really enjoyed our relationship. And he went to go be with Jesus on September 27th this last year.
oh.
And I and a few other people were there that were hydroplate theory advocates at the memorial service in Phoenix a few months ago.
How would you say, I don't want, I'm getting ahead of myself, but because obviously the Baumgartner and the plate tectonics, how does it line up? Does it contradict? Are they two different approaches to the same idea of where the water came from or where the fountains of deep being broken up? How would you say that based on your conversation with Dr. Brown and your own conclusions? What do you think about that?
Well, I have a section of my PowerPoint that's devoted to that question,
Okay,
but
good enough. Okay, we'll get to that then. I think,
well,
right, Doug?
it's at the end of it. But I would say the quick answer is Walt Brown started with the Bible, Genesis 7:11, on one day, all the fountains of the great deep burst up and the windows of heaven were open and it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. That implies a great volume of water underneath the crust that ruptured up in one day. And the windows of heaven were open, which I now believe, because comets and asteroids, all the evidence supports that they came from the earth, that the windows of heaven were open. I say it because God didn't want the windows to break. So he opened it up for the stuff that was going to be going up into the heavens. So, but of course, that's just, I mean, that's just me. And and so he started with the Bible, and then all the evidence that he was finding on Earth at first, and then in space, supports the idea that there was an ocean of water under the crust that under extreme pressure that cracked, the crust cracked, and that fountain did what it did. Long story. But what does CPT start with? CPT starts with the evolutionists are right about plate tectonics, of which there's no evidence for, and is an evolutionary billions of years model. And then, well, let's try and cram it into the Bible by making it speed up. Well, you can speed up, the faults, and I say false because an oceanographer, Christian Smoot, who spent years as an oceanographer mapping the ocean floor. He calls it tectonic globaloney because he knows he's seen the entire ocean floor, and he goes, plate tectonics is not true, did not happen for all the reasons of everything that he saw there. He was doing it for the Navy, so stuff was classified. And having been a submarine sailor, I know why the Navy wants to know what every inch of the ocean is like. And so he said, it's not supported by the facts, and plus you don't have. But let's say liquid mantle is able to come up to the mid-oceanic ridge and form the mid-oceanic ridge and seafloor spreading, which it can't because the density won't let it do so. But let's say it does. It doesn't create global rainfall. It doesn't create 22 and a half feet above the highest mountain range. It doesn't lay down sedimentary layers all over the world of millions of cubic miles of sedimentary. It doesn't cement the layers. All those, I could go on and on and on. It doesn't do any of that. And even to Dr. Baumgartner's admission, when asked several times, 5 times, Brian Lauer had to ask him, what is your biblical support for subduction starting? What's your biblical support or scientific support? And he wouldn't answer the email until he finally referenced Brian to go to a presentation he gave. Brian went to that and said it was a miracle. How did the subduction start? A miracle. How did it keep going? A miracle. How did the magma not boil all the oceans and kill everybody? A miracle. How did it cool down? Miracle. How did it, it's, and to me, he so maligns people like me. I mean, he's in writing. He calls us servants of Satan. And it's I almost feel like, wow, did you steal all of Santa Claus's bag of miracles and you're the only one that gets to pick from them? I mean, you say that hydroplate this and hydroplate that. We don't need miracles at all, but he maligns other people. I mean, the canopy theory works if you have a miracle. That there was a big ocean freighter full of water, that trillions of gallons of water that dropped water from space, and all you need is a miracle. And so he took a secular idea, sped it up, and sold it, and it's not biblical. And he was even asked, "What's your biblical support?" Well, the Bible says a flood occurred. That's the only biblical support. What is your predictions? What does CPD predict? Would be that we could go out and do a discovery to find out if what we believe as CPT people is true. What predictions have you made? Which ones have been found? Won't give us a single one.
That's one of the things in his book, a little segue here, but that always was amazing to me about a good scientific theory. And he had, and I don't know if it was original to Walt Brown, but boy, I never forgot it. He talked about explanation, prediction, and parsimony. You remember in other words, you don't have to prop it up with miracles or ad hoc explanations. The predictions seem to happen, and it explains the event. And I thought that's why I thought that the when I first read this years ago, and then I thought over the years it's kind of like wow he's become kind of an outlier, you know. I mean it seems like he's not really or hasn't really. Of course now he's gone to be with the Lord, but it's like not really invited to the social circles of the creationists, and I didn't understand that because I thought the book was quite compelling, but it was a different take on how the flood might have occurred. I didn't. I'm not a geologist, so I don't pretend to know which way is possible or not, or what it could produce. But I thought his idea the rupturing of the into the mid Atlantic and
Crust.
the
The
crust
crust.
the
Yeah,
crust
the
causing
crust ruptured and then the mid-oceanic range formed.
yes
Yes.
that I thought that was quite compelling years ago.
It's yeah, it's more than compelling.
I just didn't
And
know
there is a
I didn't know
reason
whether the two
why he got
theories
so maligned and blackballed, but we can get into
yeah.
that later too if
I
we
didn't
want to.
understand that. I don't understand why. I don't like when creationists act like pagans. You know, who basically
Yep.
try to use ad hominem approaches to basically discredit you. I don't like that. I've never cared for that kind of an approach to anything. I may
Yeah.
disagree with somebody, but I'm not going to use ad hominem attacks on them or make them feel like they're less than something. I may say and debate, and I think debate's fair. You know, but I just didn't know whether the two theories were somewhat compatible, totally diametrically opposed to each other. I didn't really understand that. But they seem quite different. I just didn't know whether they could line up in some respect or not. I just didn't know, you know?
Yeah. Well, and one of my concluding slides is, hey, Kevin, can't the two theories go side by side? And my answer is no, because one's based on the Bible, one's not. It's like, do I think that theistic evolution should get together? No, because God said He created
Yeah,
the earth in 6 days. So there's no place for theistic evolution, but some people do. They try and cram billions and billions of years into the Bible, and they come up with the gap theory and all this other stuff, redefining what
yeah.
words in Hebrew mean. And for the same reason, can there be CPT hydroplate? No. And when I gave a similar presentation to a CPT advocate in Houston, named Nathan. He said to me, he goes, "Well, Kevin, I gave evidence from space." He goes, "Well, Kevin, maybe HPT has space, but we have the Earth. CPT does the Earth, HPT does space." I go, "No, no, Nathan. I mean, if HPT has space, that means the fountains of the great deep burst up and jettison a bunch of crustal debris and mantle debris into pulsed ejections of rocks and organics and everything else into space that became asteroids and comets. If that's how it happened, and it's not magma, that the fountains are not magma that come up, then CPT is dead. If you're going to concede space, which the evidence is overwhelming, then you have to let go of CPT. And
Well,
I've even told another Jay Sigurd, I was talking to him about this issue, and I said, Jay, I'm not attached to HPT. I mean, nobody should be attached to a theory. The evidence supports it, but if what they found out is asteroids are massive solid rocks like NASA and everybody else thought they were, and they smacked the DART probe into Dimorphos, a moon of the asteroid Didymus, and they hit a solid rock like they thought they were going to, I'm done saying asteroids came from Earth. But they smacked into a floating rock pile, which is what Walt said asteroids and comets are 26 years ago when he came out with his comet and asteroid chapter. Everything we're finding in space is they're floating rock piles, 70% empty space. They've got water in them. They've got organics. They've got all these things that are all supported by the premise that they were the result of ejected material that left Earth, came together into very loosely held orbital objects, and then it flushed the air and water molecules away, so that now they don't have an atmosphere. But when they were forming, they had an atmosphere because water went up with it. And I talked to a professor from Arizona University, Northern Arizona University, and she says we can't figure out how Dimorphos ended up being a floating rock pile. Our theory is that Didymus, which was the mother asteroid, spun up, and as it spun up, it threw the surface rocks, because Didymus is a floating rock pile too. And then it decided to come and be the moon. And I had to tell her, I go, well, if that's true, then my orbital physics professor in college really bummed out me. And you and I would know it's not true because you don't spin a merry-go-round fast enough to fling everybody off of it, and they're all heading to the same place to become a moon. And see it isn't supported by physics. And if that conversation could have lasted long enough for me to say, well, what if Dimorphos at one time and Dynamis at one time was the result of an explosion of a planet that with water and water molecules and gas molecules to be aerobraking to let the individual pieces come together, just like aerobraking when something falls into the atmosphere, it's going to end up on Earth. She would say, oh, yeah, that would happen, but that didn't happen. Well, that's because that's all they need. That all they need to understand asteroids and comets is they used to have an atmosphere,
Hmm.
but they don't know that because they don't have the hydroplate theory.
Well,
We
Kevin, why don't you start your slideshow?
Okay, here it is. I'm Pastor Kevin Lee from Calvary Chapel at Port Archer, which I'm only going to be the senior pastor until April 12th. And I'm stepping down to devote full time to hydroplate theory dissemination now that
Hmm.
the ninth edition of Walt Brown's book is going to be arriving in America towards the end of April. It answers the question, where did the water? It's the only one that answers the question, where did the water come from and where did it go? And Walt Brown was a West Point Army Ranger graduate, and he went off to be the first Army officer to get a doctorate degree. They sent him to MIT to get a doctorate degree. His thesis it was used to design reactor plant cores for the Navy. I was trained on his thesis when I was in the Navy. His thesis was transmitting the thermal energy equal to the surface of the sun into a water channel through a metal barrier, which was important for the Navy to know how to do that to keep us from melting down the cores. He
Hmm.
retired as a full colonel, devoting his time to his book, and the flip book is now available at creationscience.com. You can read his book on creationscience.com as a flip book, soon to be hard copy available. 5 minutes synopsis of Walt Brown's hydroplate theory. But first, what does the Bible say? In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, the clincher, on that day, one day, all the fountains of the great deep, which implies that fountains of water, that word always means water, that deep underneath the crust of the earth was a ocean worth of water, so that when the crack ruptured, all those fountains all around the world were broken up, and the windows of heaven were open, and the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. The only way you can have global rainfall is something other than the normal hydrological cycle that we experience when we get rain up here in Washington all the time. That cycle of thermal energy would burn up the planet to have it global for 40 days. And so it has to be a fountain of water. It has to be water that comes up as a fountain. And this is a side view. It's not totally accurate to everything we'd like to communicate, but right here, we call this the pillars. The crust was attached to the mantle. We'll call this the mantle down here. And this porous area is because the supercritical water, this water would have gotten hot enough to be over 705 degrees. Then it turns to another state of water called supercritical, has extreme erosion and chemicals, putting things into solution power. And so the bottom of the crust would have become like a sponge. Same with the floor of the subterranean chamber, which was mantle material, which was also getting made into a porous kind of environment because of supercritical water. The pressure built up and ultimately a crack ruptured, the crust ruptured. And as soon as it ruptured, then this extreme power, thermal energy contained in the water was turned into kinetic energy as it went up through the crust. Some of it came back down as water. Some of it went up to space and came back down as ice to bury the frozen mammoths and freeze fish in the act of swimming, etc. That's all documented in Walt Brown's book. And some of it went up into space and left Earth's gravitational field by reaching escape velocity of 7 miles a second. And when it's doing that, it's eroding this crack. And this is not, the erosion of the crack is not shown in this animation, which I'll show you in a minute. So this crack would have been going in the shape of the continental slope. It would have been taking debris from the mantle, from underneath the crust, from the side of the crust at the crack, and that would have become the sedimentary layers all over the earth. That pulverized stuff coming up, coming down would have created the 1 mile thick sedimentary layers. The chemistry of the subterranean chamber provided the calcium carbonates that solidified the sedimentary layers. And some of the material would have gone up into space, becoming comets, asteroids, and trans-Neptunian objects. So now I'll hit the animation here, and you're going to see that the crust would have been fluttering, and the crust fluttering, the granite crust is filled with piezoelectric quartz, and there would have been extreme voltages and currents. Dr. Baumgartner, in his flood science review, said that's preposterous and full of garbage, but they now know every major earthquake creates massive voltages and currents in the crust. And so we saw the debris that went out. The pillars crashing would have sent debris that was thousands of degrees. That's why some meteorites and things that they're finding on asteroids and comets were at one time thousands of degrees, explained by the hydroplate theory, not explained by anything else. And so the crust would have been fluttering, and the water would have been escaping from here, going over the relatively flat. The mountains weren't formed yet. Relatively flat Earth, and I'm not a flat earther, I mean a spherically, no mountains.
Yeah.
And it would have continued to do this for the 150 days until the compression event. Job says he shakes the earth out of its place and the pillars tremble. We believe that that is talking about those pillars. Now, this is also a simplified animation, but here again is the crack, and the water's jettisoning and it's eroding. And as it erodes this, crust on both sides, the gap gets wider, and that's going to create a force where the mantle wants to pop up into this middle crack area. And we'll see this. So it doesn't show the erosion, but it would have been happening. This is the mid-oceanic ridge. Then this is America moving west, crashes into the rising Pacific Ridge, creating the Cascade Mountain Range that is right here where, Olympic Mountain Range, Cascade Mountain Range. As the crust came to a halt, we also have the Rocky Mountains bow up, the Appalachian Mountains. So this is just one big train wreck that it gets going 40, 50 miles an hour, I think is what Walt, worked out the numbers. And so when it runs out of, lubrication of the supercritical water is more lubricative than oil. It's like an air hockey. And so this crust was moving until it ran out of, if it ran out of lubrication, it would have created massive amounts of magma that would have spilled out on the floor you can see it around Yellowstone Park and other places where massive magma, breached the surface and poured out in lava field. And this is what's underneath our area here. And they have found brackish aqueous solution underneath every mountain range. And so that's and this is the mid-oceanic ridge that formed as it popped up into the cracks where the crust had cracked and then widened because of the tearing away of the sides of the crust by the escaping water, hypersonic escaping water that blew debris all over the continents. And this is so North America and South America are moving to the west. Africa is moving to, and Asia are moving off to the east, away from this mid-oceanic ridge, which is a perfect fit if you include the continental shelf. Don't look at the continent the way it is, the way we see it on Earth with the oceans. If you look at the continental shelves, it's a perfect fit. So this is what it would look like. And see here, the emphasis is here. We have the pre-flood seas. The crust is solid all around the earth. The pre-flood seas are just places where the crust was bowed down and collected water. So nothing like the oceans that we now have. Shallow seas, low elevation mountains, easy to flood the entire planet with the water that was escaping. And then this is what it would have looked like from space. You would have seen water. And even though it's supercritical hot water, 1,000+ degrees, and under extreme pressure, by the time it depressurized to zero, coming up to Earth's atmosphere, it's been all the thermal energy is converted to kinetic energy, and it's not hot anymore. It's able to, and it would have then condensed and come up into space. And as that animation showed, the debris had an atmosphere around it, and it would ultimately come together into comets and asteroids and trans-Neptunian objects. And this is what Walt has in his book, The Fountains of the Great Deep launched rocks and muddy water. I added and organics because it's kind of implied into space. So that's what the theory is based on Genesis 7:11 and the fact that there was enough energy to have it reach escape velocity. I added organics because Walt predicted decades ago that they would find that the methane on Mars is a result of bacteria and other organics being jettisoned to Mars. It's not a natural chemical or methane because it changes with the seasons. And so what he should have added to that is, well, you're going to expect to find it on asteroids and comets too. He made the prediction before he thought we'd actually go and grab debris off of a comet or asteroid. But now that we have them, we find organics. And so this is the only premise. The rest of this is absolutely true by the laws of physics. If you jettison from the Earth rock and debris at escape velocity and water, then the following would happen. The rocks would move further away from the Earth. Earth's gravity became less significant. The gravity of the nearby rocks as you get away becomes increasingly significant. Consequently, many rocks, assisted by their mutual gravity and surrounding clouds of water vapor that produced aerobraking, merged to become asteroids. Isolated rocks in space are meteoroids. So a major rock, and usually heavy, iron nickel, while all the other debris is being blown past it, it's not going to go out with the same velocity, and it's going to be by itself and come back and smack into the Earth. Drag forces caused by water vapor and thrust forces produced by the radiometer effect concentrated most smaller asteroid into what is now the asteroid belt. That if the blue is true, all the rest of this, is laws of physics. It's just going to happen. So, what are the strongest evidence to support HPT? It's biblical. It's consistent with all 74 passages in the scriptures pertaining to Noah's flood. No verses contradict it. Evidence from space, things that we can see and study. And predictive power, the ability to scientifically explain 25 of Earth's major features, along with predicting what you're going to find in the discovery of any of those. Evidence supporting the hydroplate theory, biblical support. And Henry Morris, in 1979, wrote the Genesis record. And this is before CPT, and this is 3 months before Walt's first edition of his book. And he says, if you just read the Bible, then you have the Bible specifically attributes a flood to the bursting of the mountains of the great fountains of the great deep and the pouring down of torrential rains from heaven. These two phenomena are sufficient in themselves to explain the flood and all its effects without the necessity of resorting either to supernatural creative miracles or to providentially ordered extraterrestrial interferences of speculative nature. And then he says, it implies that the pressure really built up down in the water and then it broke. And then it broke up and came up. The most likely cause would seem to have been a rapid buildup and surge of intense pressure throughout the underground system. And this in turn would presumably require a rapid rise in temperature throughout the system. And
Mhm.
that's, I'm sorry, 1976. So that's actually Walt Brown's book was, first edition was 1980. So it was 4 years, on page 196. So that was Henry Morris just using the Bible. Then he gets his guys that come up with CPT that starts with evolutionary plate tectonics and then creates a flood. He was right by just reading his Bible, and he agrees with Walt Brown. What else does the Bible say? This is the one that's so clear. This is Peter under inspiration. For this they willfully forget that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of water, because the earth that that Adam and Eve were standing on was not in the water. It was the whole earth was flooded at the very beginning until God said, "Let the dry land appear." So some of the earth was standing out of the water. Some of it would have gone into the pre-flood oceans, not oceans like we have today, but shallow, standing out of the water and in the water. So Peter says under inspiration that the earth that we stand on was standing in water, by which that water that it was standing in, the world that then existed perished, being flooded with water. So Peter said the flood was from water that the earth was standing in, the subterranean chambers. Job says, or who shut in the sea with doors when it burst forth and issued from the womb? He's saying there was a sea of water that burst forth from the womb. And then in the yellow below that, then I said, this far you may come, but no further. And here your proud way, he stopped the flood by the doors, the bars and doors of the continental slope edges, sitting down on the mantle and stopping the exit after the compression event, which is when the mountains were formed, et cetera, that we showed earlier. Evidence supporting the hydroplate theory, evidence from space, things we can see and study. They found DNA fragments, complex organic molecules, amino acids, rounded boulders. How do you create rounded boulders? Well, on Earth, you create rounded boulders in a stream with water that beats it into a rock, beats rock against rock, and they turn into rounded boulders. There's millions of rounded boulders on the comet 67P. They call them dinosaur eggs. They have no explanation for how rocks would get rounded off, but hydroplate theory explains it. Many are rock piles. Actually, all of them they've gone to study are rock piles covered in dust, dirt, binary, and contact binary comet. So, so this is a picture of the asteroid Bennu, floating rock pile. So so loosely held together that the OSIRIS-REx space probe that went down to go get some sample from it almost was lost because they thought they were going to hit a solid object and they came down with a foot and it was just going to hit into the and catch, throw up a little bit of dust, a little bit of something that they would catch in their thing. Well, it just kept going. It was like it was going into a meringue pie. And it lit off its rocket after the program delay just before it buried itself in the asteroid. And you can tell it's a floating rock pile even through the centrifugal force is making this. It's a relatively small body, and it's got an equator because the centrifugal force is making it bulge at the equator. And this is the first time they saw that an asteroid was a contact binary. They thought that's impossible. At first, they saw an asteroid with a moon, and they thought that was impossible. Now, almost they're finding large percentages of asteroids that look like Itokawa, which they know this was an asteroid and it joined with this asteroid. It's a peanut shaped. They're finding them all over the solar system. Only the hydroplate theory can explain how two asteroids can come together and lightly touch each other and become one in space, in the vacuum of space. All 5 nucleotides for DNA and RNA, 14 of the 20 amino acids necessary for proteins, and Bacillus bacteria found in just 4.5, they brought 4.55 ounces of material returned from space, and they find all of that. And they're finding the same amino acids on Ryugu, the asteroid Ryugu, as they did on Bennu. And Ryugu found bacillus bacteria. But they said it must have been a clean room issue. So we spent $10 million to make the clean room. Here's the Bennu asteroid. They got, look at 1 gram, 1 milligram, 5.4 grams, 121.6 grams from Bennu because it sunk down into the asteroid and filled up the entire sample container to where they broke away from the asteroid and they couldn't shut the sample container until they had shook it to get some of it out. And so they had all this here, and so they're finding in a small amount 4.55 ounces total ever brought back, and they're finding all this stuff, and it's similar to the point where evolutionary astrophysics people are saying, astronomers are saying it came from the same ancient water elite. All the evidence of what they found is they both came from the same ancient watery world. Well, we happen to be a watery world. And we're not so ancient. We're only 6,000 years old.
Mm.
Now, I have
And so a now
a
extinct
question for
watery
you.
world.
I have a
Huh?
question for you, Kevin.
Yeah.
Is that I was looking up before we got on here the amino acids found on Bennu, and that they are racemic, which means that they are equal mixtures of right-handed and left-handed amino acids. Now, there's a couple of explanations for it. Explanation number one is the Miller-Urey experiment, created the amino acids in that experiment, and they were equal mixtures of the two forms, and yet life only uses the left-handed kind. But we do know that if you have left-handed amino acids outside of life, spontaneously go racemic, and so that they will end up being, they'll change over to the left-handed and right-handed kinds. So there's a couple of arguments there that you just want to ask the question, well, could you, the evolutionists would say, well, you can see that life was evolving on Bennu, and it came from another star system, or you could say that it was, it was ejected from the Earth during this event, and amino acids decayed into the right-handed and left-handed types.
Well, and all I know, I'm not unlike you. I'm not a expert in that field, but what I do know is that I sat in the University of Washington auditorium where Dr. Brownlee of the University of Washington, who was in charge of the Stardust space probe, which brought back 1 milligram of material, and he mentioned how he was shocked by everything that they found. He told the audience, we don't know when we're going to be able to explain how we found. We found minerals that only form in extreme heat. We found other things that only form in extreme cold. And we don't know how all that happened. I stood up and I asked them the question, did you find any evidence of life? Any compounds evidence of life? He didn't directly answer the question. 3 years later, he went public and the whole world got to hear that they found glycine, one amino acid, glycine. And he went public with very surprising. In fact, the delay of 3 years, they probably knew when I asked him the question 3 years earlier. His colleagues blamed him for not making sure that the Stardust space probe wasn't contaminated when it went to space. And it didn't get contaminated coming back because how could that be? How could we find glycine in space? Well, then they did a isotopic evaluation and determined that there was a little bit of carbon 14 or carbon 13 ratio was different than here on Earth. So they said it must have been extraterrestrial. But the hydroplate theory explains how there could have been extra carbon-13 on there because it would have absorbed the neutron with the nuclear reactions happening as a result of the piezoelectric effect and the what's called Z pinch in Dr. Brown's radioactivity chapter. Hydroplate theory can explain why you think it's isotopically proven to be extraterrestrial. And as a result of reading that article, because I came up to Dr. Brownlee at the University of Washington when he gave this speech 3 years earlier, I handed him Dr. Brown's email predicting everything that he thought they would find. They found everything Dr. Brown predicted they would find. And I said, and here's his asteroid chapter and his comet chapter. He studied everything about the orbits of all the asteroids and comets. And he goes, okay, I'll take this. And so I called him a few days later and he said, yeah, I started to read it, but we know that's not how it happened.
Mm.
So then 3 years later, that came out that they found glycine. And I called him up and I said, I'm the one that gave you, yep, I remember you. And I said, I saw that you're a little surprised about, yep, I'm surprised about glycine. And then I had a lengthy conversation, Dr. Brownlee, everything, not lengthy, 10 minutes maybe, everything that we're finding in space, you're finding in space and others, it would be supported, the explanation would be supported by material from the life planet Earth was jettisoned into space.
Mm.
When I said that, he did not hang up on me. I went on to say, you really should read Dr. Brown's work, even if it's under your sheets at night. I said exactly that. Even if it's under your sheets at night.
Very good.
And because it's so important for us to understand comets and asteroids, he ended the conversation by asking me for Dr. Walt Brown's web page address again. So I don't know about the left-handed, right-handed and stuff. I just know they were shocked. His colleagues were shocked. They blamed him for contamination. And so they're blaming it for contamination on finding a bacteria on Ryugu. But the Bacillus bacteria is extremely robust can survive in a spore form in the vacuum of space. And they've done studies on it. And they brought it back. They brought the sample, the 4.5, 5.4 grams back into the lab. And all of a sudden, with the conditions allowing for the spores to come alive, they came alive and reproduced. And they blamed it on their clean room.
Mm.
And what else could they do? The only other thing they could do is not only in the vacuum and near absolute zero of space, do we have all the nucleotides for DNA and RNA forming spontaneously through chance and time, but we have bacteria exactly like what's found on Earth that also can form in the vacuum and near absolute zero temperature of space. They know that's not going to fly, so it's got to be the clean room.
Interesting.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but they were surprised. They were shocked at first. Now they expect it because they find it, they expect it. Here's a prediction from hydroplate theory. Every time you go and dig on any asteroid, any comet, you are going to find all the same minerals that only form in the presence of extreme heat, all the minerals that only form in the presence of liquid water. When an asteroid and comet's in the near absolute zero of space, only form in liquid water, and um, and these amino acids and nucleotides are going to be the same. They're going to be similar from Earth, no matter where they go. So if that ends up being, and that's an asteroid comet that's a floating rock pile, because there's some asteroids that are just solid rocks, but they're less than 200 meters in size. And that's another prediction of hydroplate theory. You're not going to find a solid asteroid bigger than about 200 meters because that's the biggest one that could be ejected by the escaping velocity of the subterranean waters.
Oh, yeah. Hmm.
So does that answer that?
Yeah, I think
Uh,
so. I sort of answered my own question, but it's a good question. You find organics on these comets. Now, are these asteroids and comets near Earth asteroids, or are they uh,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they pick
transneptune?
asteroids that are getting close to Earth because you don't want to have to go way out. Stardust was way out. I mean, it was chosen by NASA and Dr. Brownlee because they thought it was the first time it got bounced to come into the inner solar system. So they thought they were going to get the pristine Big Bang stuff. And so that's why they chose Stardust. Or they chose the Wild 2 comet to send the Stardust space probe to go, and they just went to go scoop up the comet tail dust. So they went into the tail to catch the stuff coming off of the Wild 2 comet as it came into the solar system for the first time, they thought. Evidence supports you can go to calvarypo.com, which is an archived site. You know, I've archived what I've done in the church for the last 33 years at calvarypo.com. It was calvarypo.org. You can go to the YouTube channel on playlist on comments, and you can watch the building blocks of life and bacteria found on asteroids, where I spend an hour and a half talking about what we just talked about, using evolutionists talking about what they found. And so there's other evidence that supports it that there's wide binaries, ultra wide binaries. It just defies everything except hydroplate theory, and that's out in the trans-Neptunian objects. Earth-like minerals that form only under intense heat, pressure, and or in the presence of liquid water. The asteroids and comets that go in the same direction as that the Earth is spinning compared to the retrograde, the opposite way, um, all of that testifies that they came from the Earth. The orbit distribution indicates that it would be coming from the Earth. The Jupiter family of comets is supported by the fact that comets and asteroids were birthed inside the solar system, inside the orbit of Jupiter. There's really no other explanation for it. And heavy water in comets, which is explained by the radioactivity chapters. And so everything they're finding is consistent with their origin being the Earth. It argues against the Big Bang, and but it's easily explained, and it argues against the creation origin. I know that some of the astronomers, astrophysicists, they believe that all this was created. In fact, they're now saying that God created the amino acids and the nucleotides on asteroids in the creation week. But asteroids and comets have hit the Earth, and that's not good. And at the creation, everything was good.
Hmm.
Um, So then the results of every one of these missions is consistent with Temple One. We smacked into a Temple One comet with the deep impact, copper bullet, thinking we were going to hit something solid. We didn't. It shocked them. It was a wasted effort if it wasn't for Stardust going after Stardust. They sent Stardust to go look at the impact because the impact wasn't what they thought it was going to be. And I explain this later on. The Stardust flyby of Temple One, dual asteroid redirection test that I talked about, Dimorphos and Didymus, complete shock. The results were completely shocking to them. OSIRIS-REx mission to asteroid Bennu, surprised by finding it like a meringue pie that it sank down into. The Lucy mission observation of the asteroid Dinkinish, where not only is there an asteroid with a moon, but there's an asteroid with a moon that it's a contact binary moon. And that they really are shocked by. And the Hayabusa mission to asteroid Ryugu. And so I went through each one of those in a presentation with Real Science Radio. Oh, I'm sorry, with TCCSA NASA blunders. And
Hmm.
so if you go to YouTube and you go TCCSA NASA blunders, you'll see how each one of those projects were expecting one thing based on the Big Bang, finding another thing, all explained by the hydroplate theory. And then with Real Science Radio, we did NASA Bloch's planetary defense with the DART mission, because the DART mission was supposed to prepare for deflecting an asteroid. And so we also talk about Apophis, which is supposed to come and barely miss us in 2029, if I remember correctly. And you can go to Real Science Radio, their YouTube channel, and go to the most popular, the 11th and 12th most popular are these two presentations that talk an hour each almost on each of those things that we're talking, each of those space projects. And and then you can go to Brian Nichols' YouTube channel, Hydroplate Theory, Origin of Comets, Asteroids, Meteorites, and TNOs to find out how the ejected material became asteroids by the laws of physics, which Brian Nickel, Bryan Nickel, he has a YouTube channel. He has like 12, 13 different PowerPoint animations to help explain things. And he explains how, by the laws of physics, asteroids would go out to the asteroid belt. Evidence supporting the hydroplate theory, predictive power, ability to scientifically explain 25 of Earth's major features. And I don't want to get into the details, tons of predictions that have come true based on if hydroplate theory is right, this is what you'll find on Mars. You'll find soil and erosion channels on Mars, which will contain traces of Earth-like soluble compounds, such as salt from Earth's pre-flood subterranean chamber. Fulfilled. It was published in there. Salt was first discovered on Mars in March of 2004. I mean, on and on and on. Predictions made, predictions fulfilled. Not all of them, because there hasn't been enough discovery yet, but predictions made and fulfilled. So what are the three great problems with catastrophic plate tectonics? No scriptural support, multiple miracles invoked to make it work, no predictions made or fulfilled. We have, Brian Lauer has made multiple requests to Dr. Baumgartner. Give me a prediction. Give me a fulfilled prediction. Won't do it. One invoked miracle is impossible for God to perform. CPT initiation of the flood is contrary to the scriptures. And the scriptures say God honors his word above his name. And that's not the only example of an impossible miracle. Therefore, CPT cannot be used as an apologetic tool to the unbeliever. Even if the miracles weren't contrary to the Bible, you go to an unbeliever, well, how did that happen? Miracle. How did that happen? Miracle. Oh, okay, goodbye. It's not an apologetic tool if we invoke miracles and they don't even believe in a God of miracles. Greatest weakness of CPT, tsunamis cannot erode the end of the crust to create 60 million cubic miles of sediment. Receding tsunami sequences would erode freshly laid sediment layers and prevent any polystrate fossils. I mean, they say massive wave comes, deposits sediments that they don't explain where they came from, but then those tsunami waves go away. What would they do? They would erode that layer. If it made a layer, it would erode the layer. Tsunamis can't flood the entire Earth at one time to 22 and a half feet above the highest land. No cementing agents for the sediments. Magma cannot create supersonic jets of steam. They want to show it. At AIG's museum, it says CPT creates these jettisoning fountains of steam, because that's what the Bible says. But we know that magma on the ocean floor doesn't create fountains of steam. It can't create a 2.5 mile thick layer of salt under thousands of meters of sediments that contain fossils in different places of the world. Some CPT advocates say that the magma came up in the Gulf to make salt, but there's no mid-oceanic ridge in the Gulf for magma to do that. And this is a submarine, nuclear submarine, a 688 class submarine that ran into a underground mountain that was formed by magma pouring out on the ocean floor. Now, if you would think that if magma pouring out on the ocean floor created jets of steam, people going, whoa, look at that jets of steam. We better update our maps of the ocean floor so submarines don't run into the new mountains. That submarine was destroyed because it ran into a growing, uncharted mountain.
Mm.
And CPT is based on plate tectonics, which is based on Pangea that broke apart. The guy that invented Pangea, the animation, size, and movement are deceptive. And from an engineering standpoint, things don't just move. You have to have forces to make them move that oppose the friction that are opposed to that movement. Miracles must be invoked, and they are invoked. And this is what I was telling you about. Christian Smoot wrote his book after looking all over the oceans of the world, Tectonic Globaloney, Closing Arguments. 45 years after the synthesis of the plate tectonic hypothesis, much newer and better information has been gathered by the seagoers of the world, contrary to popular opinion among earth scientists. The purveyors of plate tectonics are the present day, and he goes on to say, snake oil salesman. 20 reasons, another book, 20 reasons plate tectonics cannot happen. So what possibility of problems do you see for for making a composite theory? About the same as God using evolution to create life, that a 6-day creation can equal millions of years, that the first chicken hatched out of a lizard egg. The Bible says that the fountains broke up and caused 40 days of global rainfall that flooded the entire earth to 22 and a half feet above the land. Magma and tsunamis can't do that. Flood research should embrace truth and reject fiction. Those who reject biblical creation and the flood manufacture fairy tales in an attempt to explain objects in our solar system. But the biblical Christian can have an answer that is consistent with the Bible and science and use that knowledge to reject the deceptions and be a witness to others if they use the hydroplate theory, which is maligned. But the earth is now being preserved by the same word. It's reserved for fire. And even that, the hydroplate theory explains why there will be global runaway earthquakes, why there will be volcanic explosions around on the earth. But God is not slack concerning his promises, but he's waiting for more people to come to Jesus before judgment comes. Special thanks to my beautiful wife, Juanita, who's been an HBT widow many times over the years. And to Dr. Walt Brown for devoting his life to give us a biblical and scientific explanation for the flood of Noah and all its consequences, who went to go be with Jesus on September 27, 2025. And therein ends my presentation.
Very good.
Well, thank you, Kevin. I appreciate what you have to say here. We have a couple minutes left. I'm glad that we got in contact with you and that we are able to have you as a guest on our show. And so, question from Freddie, what's up? My whole thing is figuring out the chemistry of the organics that are on these
Yeah.
asteroids. That's interesting to me, and so I'm going to have to look at that a little bit further. But that is revelation to me that they're finding all these organics on these asteroids, and it's might argue for the Miller-Urey hypothesis, creating life in the test tube, and it really doesn't. The problem is combining amino acids to form proteins and to actually form the components of life, which in my last presentation on Revolution Against Evolution, where we talked about chlorophyll and hemoglobin, that those processes fail very shortly within the process of creating the proteins. So